Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Leon.
And we're your co-hosts today. Today, we're joined by Professor Christian Terwiesch and Professor Ethan Mollick. Just a little bit of background about our guests. Professor Terwiesch is a professor at Wharton, where he is the chair of Wharton's Operations, Information, and Decisions Department. He has researched with and consulted for various Fortune 500 organizations, and his latest book, Connected Strategies, was featured as the cover story of Harvard Business Review. We're also joined by Professor Mollick, who's an associate professor at Wharton, where he studies and teaches innovation and entrepreneurship. He's also the academic director and co-founder of Wharton Interactive, where he works to transform entrepreneurship education using games and simulations. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Christian and Ethan, we're super excited to have you here on the podcast. Where are you calling us from?
I'm out in San Francisco. I'm teaching in the Wemba West right now, and so I moved out from Wynwood, a Lower Merion area around Philadelphia, to San Francisco for this quarter.
And I'm in beautiful Philadelphia, the heart of Whartonville.
Awesome. Let's dive right into it then. Christian, we've heard so many people talking about how GPT was able to pass an exam in a core academic class at Wharton. In your opinion, how should we be thinking about what this means for higher education? Will it be a tool like a calculator that we'll eventually adapt to, or should it prompt a broader rethink of how we measure and derive value?
Well, that's a really deep and long-winded question, right? So let's start with the basis where what actually happened, because I imagine few people actually read the paper as opposed to read the headline. So what I did over the winter break is I basically played around with the tool. My kids are using it for their work and their homework assignments and alerted me to the technology. And so the question came up, hey, Dad, will this pass your exam? And so I uploaded a bunch of questions, wrote out this report, and somehow that thing got viral. Had some super interesting discussions, but I think the question that you asked is much more convoluted than I think you might realize. So that's kind of the short answer first. I think it's going to be a great tool, but it's still right now only a tool. What happens in 20 or 30 years from now when people talk about AI gaining consciousness, I mean, who knows? Only Elon knows, probably. And so I think let's focus on the next 5 years, and I think that's going to be a great tool that will change the way we work, but it will not change the world.
Got it. And Christian, you wrote about your commitment to excluding the use of ChatGPT from classroom assignments and exams on foundational knowledge. Well, Ethan, you've described how all of your classes will become AI classes. For both of you, what motivates your stance? And do you think the use of AI should differ based on course material or be approached in a similar way across the classroom?
So I would say we teach a lot of different things, right? Some of the things we teach are aided by AI. Some of the things we teach are probably not aided by AI. You gave the example of calculators earlier. We figured out how to teach math with calculators, and the answer is you still need to learn to do math, but then at some point we stop making you add and subtract things, and we start having you use a calculator so you can do more advanced topics with less kind of work. So I think that there's going to be differences by class. I also think it depends on whether the class feels like AI is something that will add to the tool set you're using. So for me, requiring AI in the class was about both. I have a class that is entrepreneurship and innovation, and so there's a lot of different kinds of assignments. It has allowed me to assign more work than I did before, not less, because people can accomplish more things, have higher standards for work, and also get people used to a tool that I think is absolutely going to transform how they work. But there are classes where that will not be appropriate or the right thing to do. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, but I think that trying to do a lot of banning is going to be very hard.
I think you have to always ask ourselves, and please, Leon and Jordan, don't do this at Wharton, but you have to always ask yourself, like, why is the professor giving the assignment? What's the purpose of the assignment? There's some tests where you basically certify a skill. So you become a certified public accountant, get certified to drive a car. For these types of certification tests, I think we have to agree that we probably should ban the technology. You could also send your brother-in-law take the test for you. So in some sense, you should get certified as an individual, not as a technology. Then there's the test where I test you and I want to get a sense of where do you stand on your learning journey? Have you absorbed all of the material? And again, for that, I think that the technology is counterproductive, because what's the point of me teaching you week 7 material if you're still struggling on week 2, but only look good because you've used a piece of technology? I think for the engagement type of assignments, and I think that is very prominent at Wharton. I mean, I'm thinking about Ethan's course, but I think for other courses too, that the purpose of the assignment is not to get an answer. The purpose is to engage and kind of mess around and immerse yourself in the material. I think for those, we can use the technology. And I think there we are now having an additional tool to teach, and that's a great thing.
Great. Quick follow-up to that point then. So when you speak, for example, about certifiable knowledge, which I think is similar in some ways to the core classes at Wharton, does the fact that ChatGPT or similar tools the fact that they can perform well on this type of knowledge, does that change how we should think about the value of that knowledge, or just about how we should measure it and decide where not to allow these tools to be used?
I think it really depends on the field. I'll give you two examples. In both of them, I want to think about technology as a stack, going from the application level down to something that is more specific and technical. So take regression analysis, right? Empirical analysis is the application. You want to be able to empirically link X to Y. Regression analysis and OLS is a tool. And deep down in that algorithm, there's a tool to invert a matrix called X prime X. And there's a pretty foundational tool that I think few of us would argue that you should learn how to matrix by hand these days. I think there, the piece of knowledge is irrelevant by now. But take corporate valuation. I think we can agree that corporate valuation is important. Corporate valuation is based on discounted cash flow. Discounted cash flow is based on interest rates and compound interest rate. Should you still understand what a compound interest rate is? Yep, absolutely.
I think I'll be a little more provocative here and say I don't know what's useful next. I do think that this is a giantly large shakeup. I think the foundational knowledge still matters. I think we build expertise from foundational knowledge. So I'll agree with everything that Christian says, that from an education perspective, that all makes sense. My pushback would only be, or not even pushback, my only disagreement would be like, I do think jobs are going to change as a result of this, and that changes the kind of store of knowledge we're expected to have, our ability to transfer that knowledge. And I don't have answers as to what that's going to look like. I don't think anybody does.
Ethan, how do you think about intuition? I'm wrestling with that one. So I think by doing these pedestrian pieces of technology, you're building a muscle that you might not immediately use, but it's important to know that a million plus a million is very different from a billion plus a billion. And if you delegate everything to the calculator, that kind of managerial intuition is not formed in the brain. How do you think about that?
So two things. What you're talking about is the same problem we have everywhere in pedagogy, which is the building of expertise. So as far as we can tell from all the research on expertise, you build expertise by getting a set of facts. You need foundational facts. Then you need an opportunity to practice. And then that generates expertise, and expertise doesn't map well back to what we taught. An expert can't easily tell people how they're doing the thing they do because they're creating their own heuristics and rules, as you're talking about. That's the kind of intuition. So one thing we need to do is if you outsource all of the facts and all of the practice, then you're not going to be able to build expertise, and you're not going to have that intuition. There is some interesting hints that we can do shortcuts to building expertise through ChatGPT. So for the hardest problem in education is the problem of transfer. I teach you guys stuff in a classroom all the time, or better yet, I run my simulation class, right? So you guys, some of you, have taken my simulation class. And if you're in my simulation class, you're supposed to be applying everything you've learned at Wharton to run a fake company in real time. And everybody panics over stuff that I know we've taught you, right? Like negotiations, basic strategy stuff. And I know you've gone through this. I know negotiations is one of the most compelling classes at Wharton. And people struggle to actually use those concepts in the class. It's the transfer problem. It is the biggest problem in education, right? I can teach you stuff, you can pass the test, you know it, can you transfer it? I think ChatGPT gives us the ability to start doing things like practicing transfer in other ways by saying, okay, give me a Seinfeld script that uses this concept. Give me 4 business scenarios that use this concept, and then having people critique what's right and what's wrong about them. We start to be able to approach some of these problems in different ways that might build expertise or intuition faster. We just don't know yet.
On that exact topic, Christian, I know you've written about how educators and business managers need to raise the bar now that we have this tool. And Ethan, you've similarly written about how AI can serve as a skills leveler, for example, for written assignments. How do you think AI will change our expectations of individual ability and performance inside and outside of the classroom?
I think Ethan already mentioned it, right? He is assigning more readings. There's going to be more material to absorb. And I think that's a good thing. Right now you have a tool, you're becoming more efficient. And so we have 2 ways to spend that productivity gain as always. Right? Imagine you become twice as productive. That means you can either do half of the amount of work or get double the distance. And I hope you as a student, as much as we as a faculty, want to go double the distance and end up at a higher endpoint.
I mean, the thing that makes education hard is there's almost a complete disconnect between how you learn and how you think you're learning and enjoy learning. So it turns out that any skill gain requires deliberate practice. You have to do it a bunch of times at the hardest difficulty level that you could do, get feedback on it, and then do it again. And it's like any other thing that forces you into a position of discomfort. If you're not uncomfortable, you're probably not learning. You can be really entertained, but we have all the evidence that people who say, I'm entertained or I learned a lot in a class because it was really fun, that's wrong. It's just not what's true. That's okay. I can teach an entertaining course too, and there's incentives to do that. But you have to, for example, I don't think this is a new problem. Homework used to have a huge impact on performance. So if people did the homework, they ended up doing better in their final projects and their tests. Now, this is not my class, these are studies, right? People who do the homework do not have the same impact on test taking, and it's 100% because they're just cheating on homework, which I totally get the incentive of. Homework sucks. But if you're not doing the homework, you're not going to get better at it. So there's a choice that sort of sits with you guys, right? We could use ChatGPT to push things ahead, in which case you'll learn more better and become 10 times more effective than you were before. Or we could use ChatGPT as a crutch to avoid doing work that you probably should be learning, in which case you'll learn to fake it, but you're not going to deeply absorb the knowledge or gain expertise. In some ways, it's out of my hands.
I think that speaks to something else that is unique about education, right? That is basically there is no endpoint. You can always get better. Compare this with other tasks like flipping a hamburger or underwriting a loan. If you get more productive, eventually you would say like there's a certain number of hamburgers people want to eat and loans that people need. The efficiency gain is spent on basically consuming less resources. The two areas I work in are healthcare and education, and in both of those, there is no endpoint. You can always use more, always healthier patients and better students. And so I think that makes education and healthcare very special when we look at productivity gains.
So as educators who are thinking about how you can best enable students to leverage these productivity gains and really improve their understanding and their learning rather than just cheating on homework to get ahead, for example, how do you think about structuring the environment or in providing the right encouragement for students to choose this path when using these tools?
So I think it's easy. I want there to be intrinsic motivation, right? This can't be driven by yourself. So it has to be interesting. And these tools let you skip some of the boring stuff that I haven't had to teach you. I think, for example, we're often very unreflective about the things like essays that we assign, right? We assign essays all the time, and we hope that thinking and interesting stuff's going on. And one of the things you notice as you start going to the pedagogy literature is, oh my God, we don't actually know that much how people learn. And a lot of stuff we do do it and then hope you get learning out of it. So I think that one thing you could do is you start thinking about project-based work and how ChatGPT can help you get to the good stuff better. The great thing about chat, and I keep assigning it in class, is I can tell you already, I see huge differences between people who put effort into a good ChatGPT prompt and those who don't. If you spend effort making it good, you will get a good outcome. If you spend a little effort learning and outlining what you want chat to generate for you, you'll get a good outcome. So I think that it's like anything else. We teach people how to use the tool. We give them interesting ways to use it. And it helps outsource the boring stuff that you hopefully have already mastered. So we get to the good stuff, which is the material you're producing that's interesting and engaging.
And I think going off of that point, so I saw, Ethan, in a recent tweet, you had written that it's a fascinating period in AI where the more esoteric and wide your humanities knowledge, the more you can get AI to do cool things. So to both of you, if you were going to give advice to students today about anywhere from high school students to grad school students like us, what topics do you think they would benefit from spending more time learning about in order to get to this sort of deeper level of leveraging these tools, deeper level of understanding and really producing this high quality?
So interestingly, we don't teach people to be good editors yet. And that's an interesting thing. Reading other people's work and critiquing it turns out to be really good because that's what you do with AI. Also, teaching turns out to be really good. The difference between telling the AI to write an essay and teaching it about the essay you want to write and then having it write it is profound. So I think the wider your base of knowledge also, and especially we talk about image generation, right? If you could generate something in the style of, and it come with the style of a Kia catalog or the style of, of 18th century formalism or whatever else you want, right? You can generate much more German expressionism, whatever your favorite thing is. You can generate much more interesting sets of results because basically AI has been trained on the cultural patrimony of everything we've created as humans. And it's all there, right? And then if you look at the maps of what people are actually asking AI to do, it's almost all, or at least the center of it, is classical Greek sculptures of celebrities. And we could do better than that. So part of this is, as a creativity extension tool, it helps to have high variance, as Christian would tell you too. And you get high variance by thinking and knowing different things that other people think and know.
It's funny, Ethan can predict what I'm about to say perfectly well. So I think we have to really think about what we mean with creativity and creative problem solving. And there are really two things that you do when you're creative. You generate alternatives and you pick the best ones. And so now with ChatGPT or also with DALL-E or Midjourney, what you can do, you have an artificial creation process. So you can create yourself more ideas. That's using ChatGPT to write a prompt in an essay, or as Ethan says, like recommend a curriculum to an educator. You don't have to pick all of the suggestions. You pick the best ones. And so there's an optionality logic to that. That means the best one that you're going to pick out of this extended set of options is going to get better. And then there's the point that Ethan just made on variance. I think that's a really cool thing that I would love to kind of see some research on. It's basically you get ideas thrown at you that you would have never considered yourself, and no, maybe human being would have considered themselves. And that creativity is a form of stimulus that creates variance, which in a world of optionality has a lot of value. That's why I think The irony is really that we can use this tool to support creative problem solving, not just the kind of the more linear, write a letter of recommendation or create a job application.
Interesting. And I know we've talked a lot about what this means then on the student side or on the learner side. I know that, Christian, we had also read some of your comments in the Financial Times around the potential for educators to leverage these tools to like draft and grade tests. And I know, Ethan, you had also mentioned testing its skills at drafting lesson plans for the class that I'm currently taking with you. I'm interested in, when you're more on the educator side and less on the student or learner side, what exactly does this mean? How does this help improve the educator experience, whether in creativity or in productivity? How do you see this playing a role?
I've theoretically created assignments, but I've not actually created assignments with it, because the truth is, again, we're at a level where this improves expert performance. I use this all the time when I'm writing in ChatGPT, but when I get stuck on a paragraph, the kind of thing that you spend 10 minutes staring at and rewriting, I'm like, just do it for me. And then I come back and edit it. And by the way, that ends up being the stuff people quote the most are the ones that I co-write with ChatGPT. So you need your expertise, right? You need to apply expertise to it. But to me, I'm not using it to grade assignments. I could, right? And I'm sure people will be soon using this to grade things and stuff like that. I feel I have an obligation to the people I teach that I'm not trying to take shortcuts that don't extend my ability to teach better. But the thing that it has done as a teacher that is a huge difference is the quality of projects is much higher than it has been in previous years, because a lot of the stuff that you learn later, you can learn faster. You can get that variance early on, and you can get basic screening on ideas, like what's the bad things about this. So as an entrepreneurship professor, when I teach my undergrad entrepreneurship class, I end up getting a lot of ideas I've seen a million times before, right? There's an internal list for a while with me and some of the other professors at top business schools, and we joked about like, oh, this one, you've heard, no, it's the 18th time we've heard this idea, and we know it's not going to work, but like maybe it works this time. It's $1 billion market. It's not my job to be a venture capitalist and be like, that idea is never going to work, because once you do it, if you can, you're successful. But now I find a lot less of that, a lot more new variants, because people are able to ask ChatGPT to generate ideas. I am a student who, with a background in design, who's interested in the food business. Give me 50 ideas for a startup I could run. And then not only that, they could do the first simulations of actual customer interviews, right? So they could say, you are a dentist with 10 years of experience in running 2 practices. Let me interview you about your product problems. Is it going to be accurate? Of course not. But there's something about, that co-creation process that makes things much better. And then, of course, I find people being able to focus more on getting the good stuff done and less on the writing task, which lowers the variation of people who are not good writers. Not everyone's a great writer for lots of reasons. So it's not so much that it benefits me that it's cutting my time. I'm busier than ever, right? But it is creating, I think, more opportunities to do what I do better, and by helping my students perform better.
So if I think about the B- I gave the result of 3 out of 5 questions that ChatGPT did well on my final exam. We have to, I think, calibrate 3 out of 5. When you want to get an A in my course, 3 out of 5 is not enough. And so you have to do better than that. But if I'm looking for exam questions, and I know you will, as students, not pity me for that, but after 25 years on the job, it's really hard to come up with creative exam questions. 3 out of 5 is pretty good, right? I mean, if I ask ChatGPT for 5 recommendations, I get 3 exam questions that I can use. That's pretty awesome. So I think that speaks back to this theme of creativity, variance, selection. 3 out of 5 for a cardiac surgeon is a horrible ratio. 3 out of 5 for a venture capitalist is awesome. And so I think, again, we have to kind of ask ourselves, what is a job that needs to be done, as opposed to, is ChatGPT good or bad?
Maybe on to the uglier side of this technology. Christian, you've written in your white paper, I believe, about how AI will make simple math mistakes at the 6th grade level. What's the reason why this current technology can handle what seems to be sophisticated tasks like helping to write code, but fail dramatically at otherwise straightforward work?
But first order, and again, I don't know enough about the technology itself, but first order, that type of AI is a form of language extrapolation, right? You're picking up words in paragraph in Microsoft Word. Now, if you look at Microsoft Word, you're picking up words from the last 3-4 words and extrapolate for the next kind of 2 or 3 words when you're using Outlook or Microsoft Word. Now you've basically extended that extrapolation logic to many paragraphs where you do some form of Bayesian updating of the word is about most likely to appear in the next sentence. So that part is arguably really good for writing Shakespeare, where a lot of this technology has been trained on for writing words in natural language processing. But the math part is harder, right? I mean, in a math problem, it's harder to predict what answer is going to be used. Last night, for example, I was prepping for the final exam here for my West Coast student, and I asked it a sequencing, a prioritization question, where I gave it 4 tasks and asked it in which order they should be completed. We have in operations management something that is called the shortest processing time rule, holding everything as constant. You want to do the shortest job next. So ChatGPT knew the shortest processing time rule. It would list that this is going to be what it's going to do, but then was not capable of sequencing those 4 tasks in the order of shortest task to longest task. It did everything well, but again, was not capable of making that simple listing. And I think, again, that has to do with, again, it picks up when it hears priority, it goes through its memory and finds somewhere shortest processing time rule. When it sees the number 6, 3, 5, and 9, it doesn't know what is shortest. It has no sense of shortestness.
I mean, I think these gaps are going to be everywhere, right? So part of what I think you need to do is practice. Like we just talked about mastery earlier on. There are limits to this thing. It was also not clear what limits are going to change. I think one of the big surprises, that surprised me most about the sort of AI revolution that just happened in generative AI is that I don't think there was a real expectation this was going to happen anywhere and be useful at the speed it was. Certainly, I get the sense that OpenAI didn't expect ChatGPT to be as useful as it is because it's flawed in a lot of ways. But there's a huge difference between the 3.0 model that was released a year ago and Jet 3.5, which powers ChatGPT. So there's something about quantitative size of networks. And even when you talk to people who do program LLMs, they're not explicable. We don't actually know where it's making connections. As you get larger data sets, it's abstracting at higher and higher orders when it's doing its training. And so I think there's going to be huge limits. I think those limits are going to be changing very rapidly. And unless you're very close to the ground, you're going to have trouble knowing what those are. So things it doesn't do right now, like math, maybe it'll never do it, but there's a chance that gap closes very quickly, either with new techniques or with just larger abstraction training sets.
Interesting. So thinking about applications where it is a good fit, I also wanted to talk a little bit about Wharton Interactive, where we had mentioned that you're the co-founder and academic director. Before we dive into that, would you mind just giving a brief overview for our listeners who might not be familiar with Wharton Interactive?
Sure. So that's our advanced educational gaming arm of Wharton. So I've been building games for teaching for over a decade. And the goal is, how do we take what we teach in a classroom that are these complex skills and let people practice them and live through them and be able to do things in response to them? So we build simulations of games to teach at scale. So the idea is that we want everybody in the world to be able to get a high-end education and to be able to practice things and show their talents off and put things into actual practice. So we've built games that teach Python coding and machine learning. We built games that you're on a doomed space mission to Saturn, and it's actually secretly a leadership simulator. There are things that teach you operations management. So we've been building these things out, and they've been used by, some of the games are free, used by tens and tens of thousands of people all over the world. And that's what I've been kind of devoting a lot of energy to, is building these things out and thinking about how we change education.
Great. Thanks for that overview. I know I've used at least one of the games and simulations and found it really helpful. So very exciting. I'm curious whether you see potential for generative AI to be further incorporated into Wharton Interactive, and if so, where you think the greatest potential might lie.
1 billion%. I'm very close to the game industry, and I could tell you that right now, AI is being put into every workflow in the game industry. Like there's an area where it's concept art is being generated mid-journey, 3D turnaround pictures, actual art is being generated that way, dialogue trees, it codes for you. There's an interactive fiction language called Twine that I can ask AI to generate a choose-your-own adventure in Twine about Hamlet fighting Moby Dick, and it did a nice 30-choice adventure that it built for me, and that was just runnable as is. So there's obviously a lot of generation pieces that really matter. This is an industry where one person doing more makes a big difference. The second thing I think about it is that we're incorporating into the game. So there's a lot of interactions you do with people. And I think one of the things that's often we make mistakes about with ChatGPT is we sort of think, okay, this untrained model is a secret, but you can actually train these models on your own data. I'd be curious, Christian, if you trained it on your operations book, whether or not it would end up getting A- on the test. But we're doing that with training up NPCs in the game, and I'm building some tutoring built in. So stay tuned. That's an area we're incredibly excited about and we're working on right now. We may even have stuff by the time the podcast comes out. So I think it's really important to get our hands on that.
Yeah, I think the opportunity of doing some form of role plays is really amazing here. I was puzzled by not only the fact that it did simple math mistakes, but even more so by the fact how beautifully it packaged these math mistakes. It was straight eyes, if you will. I mean, clearly the thing doesn't have eyes, but it looked me into the face and says, like, here's the answer. I've been teaching some of these cases that I fed into that for over 20 years. And over, the answer looked so plausible and so well explained that it took me hours to get confident that the answer was wrong. And so I think you oftentimes have this in management situations as well, right? I mean, you have that not to be named consulting group advising you and flashy PowerPoint presentations and cool charts and saying like, you ought to do that. And developing the skill that you look through this and say like, well, the package is good, but the analysis is crap. It's really a form of teaching that I think we cannot replicate right now, or it's more expensive to replicate this in the classroom right now. And so I think it allows us to teach in a different way. And I'm very excited about giving this some more room in the classroom.
Ethan, we're aware you have a hard stop. We have a series of rapid fire questions that we usually do, but we also have one other question. Do you have time for that?
Sure, let's give it a try.
Zooming out a bit, Christian, what do you think the greatest misconceptions that people have are around AI and especially tools like ChatGPT?
Computers are not always good at math. They can do other things as well, but sometimes they struggle with basic math.
And Ethan, what would your response be to the same question?
That unskilled use is good use, that this is something you have to learn how to do. And if you don't learn how to do it, you're going to be very disappointed with the results and not get good ones.
Great. So now we'd love to pivot and ask a couple of rapid fire style questions.
I thought that was rapid fire.
To close out our conversation.
That was slow fire.
That was slow fire. We're speeding things up now. So, Christian, what's a recent book you read that you would recommend?
I forgot the author, but it's called The Arsenal of Democracy, and it's describing how the Allied forces are tooling up their weapons and industry production for World War II and watching the war in the Ukraine and the political situation right now. I think it's really inspiring and changing the way that we think about the current world politics.
And I would say The Knowledge by Lewis Dartnell, which is basically a book about how you would rebuild civilization after the apocalypse. And what it is actually about is about how complex our technologies are, because he sort of says, like, okay, how do we start by resynthesizing simple chemicals from wood? And then how would we reboot producing antibiotics? And you started to realize how much work has been gone over the last few thousand years into simple technologies and how sort of interesting they are to work with for today. So I'd recommend that.
Back on the topic of AI, Ethan, what generative AI platform do you find yourself using the most?
Chat's the most useful, Midjourney is the most fun. I think I've generated 4,500 images in Midjourney as of today, so I use it all the time.
Wow. And what about you, Christian?
ChatGPT, though my son uses Midjourney a lot, and I've probably seen 1,000 images from him generated about architecture and Midjourney.
Very exciting. And Christian, what's your favorite prompt?
For ChatGPT or for students?
For ChatGPT.
Generate me ideas.
I'll go a little wackier. You are a dungeon master. We are about to play a game, and you're going to take me through it on a colony in Mars, and you're going to give me meaningful choices with vivid descriptions and interesting characters. You'll pause after each thing to give me 4 choices about what to do next and react appropriately to my choices, keeping the story moving forward and making sure it's full of entertainment and adventure.
Amazing.
And now to our final question to you both, starting with Christian. What's your boldest, most unique prediction about AI that you believe will happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
We're not going to run out of work. There are always going to be students to be educated. There are going to be patients to be cured. This view that we're all going to be lying on the beach and living on a universal basic income while AI is going to do the work is just absolutely nonsense.
There's only been one job that's disappeared from the census since 1950, which is elevator operator. I think we're going to see a lot of job types go extinct. I don't know what the total effect on employment is going to be, but I do think extinct or at least much less meaningful. And I think some of them are real MBA and undergrad jobs that were great jobs to go into 5 years ago. They will not be great jobs to go into 5 years from now. I don't know what they are.
Podcast producers.
Oh no, don't tell us that. Great. Well, thank you both so much. We can't wait to see what AI holds in store for us in the future. And again, really appreciate you joining the podcast. It was a pleasure to have you both on.
Thank you.
Been a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Bye all.
Thanks, everyone.